You're listening to Police Life, The Experts, a Victoria Police podcast shining a light on our people and their extraordinary skills.
This podcast episode contains references to mass murder and other potentially distressing content. Listener discretion is advised. If this causes you difficulties after listening, you can call Lifeline on 13 11 14. The recent mass shooting at Sydney's Bondi Beach has served as a reminder of how police and other first responders put their lives on the line in such tragedies, and indeed every single day. This episode is dedicated to them and to the communities impacted by these events.
Well, I was at home in my place in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, and it's got a backyard and it's got some long grass. And on a Sunday afternoon of the 28th of April in 1996, I was out mowing the lawns, and my wife, who's a first responder and a long-serving member of the Victoria Police, came to the back door, heavily pregnant with our second child, and she indicated to me that there was an incident unfolding in Tasmania, and there were several people had been shot and killed. And I didn't really give it that much thought at that time and thought, well, that's not a good incident to be unfolding. But then she came out and said there's more that have been killed. And she kept coming out on a number of occasions, and I paused and stopped what I was doing and thought to myself, and intuitively I felt that I think I'll be going to that particular event. And sure enough, later on in the afternoon at around about 6 o'clock, right when the news was coming on, my pager that I was carrying as the on-duty team sergeant went off, and we eventually deployed as a result of that.
30 years ago this year, Michael Hayes was a sergeant with Victoria Police's Special Operations Group. He, along with fellow on-duty team leader, Acting Sergeant Craig Harwood, and Tactical Operator Senior Constable Scott Grenfell, were part of the two Victorian SOG teams that answered Tasmania Police's call for help. The news reports that afternoon were horrifying.
Good evening. A siege is underway in the Tasmanian town of Port Arthur, where at least 25 people have been shot dead in Australia's worst massacre. Another 26 are wounded. The gunman is holding police at bay. He's believed to be holding at least one person hostage. Most of the victims are reported to be tourists visiting the historic penal colony at Port Arthur.
10 SOG members making up the Alpha and Bravo on-call teams, alongside two commanding officers, rushed to Essendon Airport. For the first time in Australia's history, a police tactical team was crossing the border to help another state's police force. Scott Grenfell explains they hoped to take all their equipment with them to help deal with such a massive event.
We arrived at a hangar in Essendon Airport with all our gear ready to go, and got a rude shock from the pilot when we were unloading all these equipment and bags and stuff to take down there. When he sort of said, "No chance, boys. You're not getting all that on my aeroplane. We won't get off the ground," because they weren't, the planes we went over on weren't big commercial sort of aircraft. They were tiny little. They were twin engine, but they were very small little light aircraft, and they weren't conducive to taking lots of equipment. You want to take everything you can, all the equipment for every contingency, anything and everything that might happen. So that just wasn't possible to get all that equipment on the aeroplane, and obviously it was urgent. There was a requirement for us to get there quickly to, stop the killing if there was any more.
The latest information Victoria Police had was that a lone gunman was holed up at a bed and breakfast property called Seascape, 5 minutes drive from the Port Arthur historic site on the Tasman Peninsula. As the leader of the Alpha team, Craig Harwood had a prime role in the tactical decisions for all that they would face down at Port Arthur.
So you start making command decisions then. What information do we have? what's happening on the ground, what environment are we in. And we didn't have a lot of information of where Seascape Cottages was, or what was going on. So we just had to really cull our equipment. Obviously, one of the reasons that they'd said to us by the time the command element got to Essendon Airport was we had just been issued night vision equipment for our weapons systems. As soon as we got equipment like that, we would rapidly integrate it onto our weapon systems, make sure that they're operational, make sure that we knew how to use them properly, and, that they're accurate and all that sort of stuff. Obviously, key elements to sniping equipment and observation equipment. We'd done that pretty quickly, and Taspol, for whatever reason, hadn't fully integrated that. So they had a gap in their night vision capability. And that was one of the reasons they'd asked us. So they'd stressed to make sure that we bring all that down.
When choosing which equipment to take, Scott recalled an important lesson he had learned 2.5 years earlier on his training course to get into the SOG.
Probably the toughest time I had on my training course was when the directing staff at the time was saying there would be a water component at one stage, where we'd be operating in the water, and he kept on looking out the window and saying, today's not the day, it's too nice a day. And one of the days it was freezing, there was sleet coming in sideways and raining, and he said, today's the perfect day for our water exercise we'll be doing. And we ended up at the beach in this freezing, horrible day, and then into the water, and they just kept us there to the point where hypothermia was setting in on me, and my body begun to shut down. And I thought, this is going to be the day where I'm going to be off the course, because if I don't very soon declare that I can't cope anymore, I'm going to drown. I was starting to gurgle underwater and think I'm in a bit of trouble here, and I'm going to have to declare and I'll be off. And it was at that time that he said, okay, that's enough, everyone out. And we were back out onto the beach and started running. And I think 5Ks later I was still shivering. So I had that experience of things shut down, and no matter how firm your mindset is, if your body shuts down on you, you can't function. So for me, the cold was something I like to be protected against. So when the pilot said you can't take all that equipment, I prioritised stuff to keep me warm. Even though it was a nice day that day, I was always conscious of the cold and what it could do to you. So I grabbed all my battle equipment basically and made sure I had provisions to stay warm. And back then we had 2 polar fleece type jackets and thermals and things like that. And I had one was a black polar fleece jacket and the other one was a green one for camouflage. And I put both of them on and sat in that aircraft and just about boiled all the way over there. But I had provisions for the cold.
2 aeroplanes carrying the Victorian SOG teams were wheels up around 8:30 p.m. and racing across Bass Strait, 600 kilometres south to Hobart Airport. About 7 hours earlier, the tactical commander and second in charge of the Tasmanian Police Special Operations Group, Senior Sergeant Jim Morrison, was outdoors tackling some odd jobs.
It's absolutely crystal clear to this day. I had a property just outside of Hobart, so many acres, and I was repairing or doing something to a wire gate that joined our property when I received the first of many mobile telephone calls. And these were people that, being a small organisation in police numbers, everyone knew me, everyone knew I was in the Special Operations Group and had been for so many years. And so the first call came in from a sergeant. He was one of my SOG sergeants, but on that day, because we were a part-time unit, he was working his primary role, and he was a uniform sergeant, and he was proceeding down to the Tasman Peninsula. And so the first reports he gave to me was to the effect that there's been reports of 5 to 6 people having been shot at the Port Arthur site. Details were sketchy and unclear, and there was a massive response going down there. It's very busy on that particular time of the day, tourist buses, a lot of tourists, and if those reports were correct, and if it was at the historic site in that area, this was going to be particularly difficult. Anyway, it wasn't long, and I'm literally talking minutes, and I just stayed poised, looking at, keeping on what I was doing, because you need to verify these sort of facts. And this was raw information that people were trying to give me a heads up start so I could appreciate what may be coming. Then the mobile calls came in thick and fast. Went from 5 to 6 to 8 to 10 to 12 to 16, and it just kept on going. And so it became quite apparent we were going to face our most difficult day.
The state of Tasmania at the time had a population of about 450,000 people, just a tenth of the population of Victoria. So while Victoria Police's SOG was a full-time unit, Tasmania had a far lesser need for a specialist tactical unit, and its operators worked part-time in the SOG and part-time in other police units. But on this catastrophic day, Jim quickly called every single SOG member into action.
I then went to the Hobart Airport, knowing the peninsula, knowing the lay of the land. It's very forested, it's undulating, and not knowing where we'd actually be deployed to eventually. I needed to get a good appreciation from the air. So most helicopters were taken up. There was medevacs already underway. The response was not well underway, but certainly the first stages of it seemed to be a medevac of injured, or at least attending there to deal with people that had been injured. So pretty much there was a helicopter made available, and we flew down to that general location. It was then, after putting on the earmuffs and the comms set in the helicopter, that you heard the airwaves just alight with information as to, you heard it from the police communications network. Well, we then heard the calls of pilots that were going in helicopters and as part of medevacs to get critically injured people out, and then ambulances going in, and still a lot of police responders and other first responders unsure just how wide this event was going. Was it just there? Are they putting themselves at danger by going down there? Like, who did this? How many people were involved? Where are the offenders? What's the reports about them? Trying to make a safe area. So that was part of our plans as a tactical group for the Special Operations Group, to make a safe area for the first responders to respond to and operate from. As we were flying in the helicopter with no visuals at that stage, we were quickly drawn to the Seascape property, which was a bed and breakfast. I wasn't totally aware of where that was, but as we flew in, the reports were coming in that a car had been stopped, someone had been abducted, and a car had been stolen and had been driven to this property. And the police had responded to the property, to the events at that property, some kilometres from the Port Arthur historic site, and they had come under fire from the Seascape property. Gunfire was coming in their direction, and allegedly the car was on fire. So as we flew closer, we could see quite clearly a plume of smoke coming out of this car. So validated the fact that the car was right next to the property. We could see the police car some 200-300 metres away. Couldn't actually see the police at that stage, who said they were pinned down by gunfire. And so the pilot didn't want to go anywhere near that, and I didn't want him to go any further. We had seen all that we needed to see, and it was quite apparent that was the only information we had at that point where the offenders or offender may be.
The helicopter landed at Turana, a township several kilometres north of Seascape, where a police forward command post had been set up. Jim was briefed on the latest information, while the rest of the Tasmanian SOG arrived by car.
So we all pretty much got there at the same time, and we had our priorities at that stage were to isolate, contain, evacuate that Seascape property. Whatever was happening down there, we needed to lock that area down and not let anyone else go in and or escape, and then just try to ascertain what we actually have there. Reports sort of came in at that stage concerning an elderly couple that were residents of the Seascape property that ran the B&B, and so didn't know where they were, couldn't verify their location. One of the things that came out was that the different calibre of weapons that were being fired from the property, which we didn't know at that early stage on deploying and doing a reconnaissance before deploying personnel. The elderly couple, were they engaged in a gun battle with people trying to break into their property? So you would think about best case and worst case. Worst case was we've got multiple offenders with multiple weapons of different calibers, and they appear to be on the basis of where the gunfire was coming from at that property. But then other reports came in that when this car was stolen and taken to the Seascape property, a male person had been abducted at gunpoint, his partner shot, and he had been taken to the property. So at that very earliest, rawest information, we certainly needed to develop hostage rescue plans for that particular property.
They also needed to rescue the 2 young constables pinned down near their police vehicles.
One particular tactical plan of our groups was for the welfare of those 2 officers, was to keep them there, reassure them, don't let them get up and try to get out, and us to try and get there and get them out. And we couldn't do that till darkness. So those guys were stuck in that, in for the best word, I suppose, a ditch or a culvert area where they could have some cover whilst their car was being peppered with gunfire. And then eventually, in the early hours of the evening, when it was dark and under the cover of darkness, and still receiving spasmodic gunfire, indiscriminate gunfire coming from the house, we executed a tactical plan to rescue those 2 guys and got them out from that ditch. And then we just went back to our original plan of isolate, contain and evacuate to assist negotiation of what was occurring inside that Seascape property for the remainder of the night.
A police negotiator had been in contact via the phone at Seascape with a man they believed was the offender. Throughout a series of calls in the afternoon and evening, the offender told the negotiator that he had hostages with him in the main house at Seascape and that he had been preparing them food and drinks. But those negotiations broke down after the portable phone the offender was using seemed to run out of battery. With the entirety of the Tasmanian SOG deployed and no one in reserve, Jim was worried early on that their capabilities would soon be stretched too thin.
The capability was only going to be for a limited time, and it was being whittled away by all the things that we were required to do, and that was still not just putting all our eggs in one basket. That the offender was at that property, and so making sure we had a ready reaction capability to go anywhere on the Tasman Peninsula to reports that may come in after that. The whole group was deployed, and I could foresee straight away going into a protracted incident, which it was going to be, and we were still in the hours of daylight, that it was at that point that I foresaw the need to get support from other states. And we had a beautiful relationship with Victoria SOG. I had personal friendships there, had done some training with the Victorians, been on counter-terrorism training with them, knew a lot of them. I made a phone call to a friend of mine who was a senior sergeant in the Victoria Police SOG, and I just sort of, in the brief moment, said, "This is what we've got. It's as bad as you're hearing on the news, and we're going to make a formal request to get your members come to support us. We're going to need it. We're going to need it for all the other plans that we'd need to develop going into the night, just for the relief of personnel that are being on the ground." And it was quite easy to see straight away, early on, and forward thinking, that we need to get something in motion, which hadn't been done before, but that didn't matter. We need to make it happen, and to get our colleagues from Victoria to come down and work with us to make it a safer place and get control of this.
While this would be the first time a police tactical unit would operate interstate, it wasn't the first time the Victorian and Tasmanian SOGs had worked side by side. For many years, each state police force would send members of its top tactical units to national training courses each year.
I formed some really good close friendships with the Victorians during those early courses. Subsequently, I went back to those courses that happened every year, where the police tactical groups would put the best of their personnel towards. It was all about skills enhancement. It was all about interoperability training. So Craig Harwood became a friend of mine. He was a Sierra or sniper instructor, and I was an assaulter or tactical operator instructor for one particular course, and we became good mates during and after that. This is well before Port Arthur. And then subsequent to that, coming out of that training, we put forward proposals to our commissioners to have interchange with Victorian Special Operations Group. So I was the first team. We took was called a red team, took my red team to Victoria. We trained with the Victorians, jumped out of your helicopters, did all the training, did some appreciation of the spirit of Tasmania, did some joint things that we could possibly see under a counter-terrorism theme where we'd be coming together. Very impressive what the Victorians had done. There was a lot of international experience and studies that they had been a part of, including the hostage rescue team in, the FBI, GSG9 in Germany, where Craig had gone to. So there's a lot of good international experience that we could, drill into and to enhance our capability in Tasmania. So even our vehicles, our tactical vehicles, it just seemed to make sense that, and we put in a proposal and it was accepted, that they would be purchased and then go to the Victoria Police Garage in Melbourne to be fitted out, pretty much like the Victorian ones were. So if there was an interchange or during live operations or training, that's pretty important.
Craig Harwood remembers the national training courses being intense and extremely competitive, bringing together the best of the best.
I was lucky enough to do that 3 times. So I went over as a sniper and did really well over there. Went back later on as an assaulter. So I was lucky enough to do it twice, which was quite unique at the time. And then I went back as a national instructor. And you do develop a lot of friendships. And just prior to the Port Arthur issue, I'd been over there as the national sniper instructor, coordinating all the police sniping teams. And Jim Morrison, who was a senior sergeant at that stage, was the assault team instructor. So we had formed a really good relationship because, you're over there for a considerable period before the course starts. And course is a 2-week course and, we're there for 2 to 3 weeks before that. And then you're liaising, 12 months before that, to make sure that you've got the best and most relevant course to get the most out of what you're trying to achieve. So we had developed great relationships and as it was, we developed a great relationship with a guy that was soon going to be deployed operationally. And, obviously also there's the brotherhood too. You're a fellow police officer and you're a fellow tactical officer. So there's a lot in common as individuals anyway.
We're on the same wavelength. We both thought the same about the way that we were instructing that particular course and the people. And we both have a brutally honest approach to life. And I don't tolerate fools, and neither does he. And that's the strength of our relationship.
At the time, Jim made the call for Victoria's help. He didn't know that Craig would be sent down. And not only was he getting one of his friends, he was also getting 2 of the very top tactical operators in the country. Craig had long been recognised as one of the best, if not the best, police snipers in Australia and had earned the codename Sierra 1. Mick Hayes was also given top accolades at national training courses for the discipline of close quarters battle, or CQB.
Craig was over there doing the sniper element of that particular training program. I was doing the close quarter battle component, and in amongst all of the national teams, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, Western Australia, Craig won the J.W. Matten Top Shot Trophy, and I happened to be the winner of the CQB Trophy. And there's a fantastic photo that we've got of each of us receiving those awards, and one of my treasured items.
After the Victorians arrived at Hobart Airport, more than an hour's drive from Seascape, they were sworn in by Tasmania Police Commissioner John Johnson as Special Constables of Tasmania Police. This was to give them the authority to operate within this different jurisdiction.
They had their traffic operations group cars there waiting to take us down. These traffic operations groups, it was their moment to shine, and, they're old, I can't remember if they were Fords or Holdens or something, and it's a windy road. It's a thin road, a lot of off-camber turns and stuff like that, and you're filled up with, the driver, and then it was the sergeant himself in the front seat, and you've got 3 operators crammed in with all their gear and then their boot full of gear. So the cars are pretty overloaded and they're going at 120, 30, 40 kilometres an hour. And by the time we got there, the brakes were smoking and the car was nearly had it. And, we thought we'd die a few times, but to give it credit, none of us did. And we didn't lose any vehicles, and we got down there in a record time.
So to see them turn up in your state to assist you during our time of need, it's very reassuring. But then you're in operational mode. It's just like another team's coming in, but it's deep down inside. It's deeply rooted that these are people who I know. I know how we're going to work together now. We've worked together before in a training environment. Now we just got to put it into practice.
Unlike the movies that you often see where law enforcement agencies in America, when you've got the FBI and a local police department and a sheriff, and maybe even throw in a state trooper, and they'll all be arguing at the scene about who's in charge. We certainly didn't have those sorts of experiences, and it was done very, very well, I thought.
And I think that I know that happened very well. I know that the comments coming from, my brothers in the Victoria Police, that it was like the two units had been working together for years, and so there was just this coming together, and there was no difference in our our approach or mentality or the psychology of what we were actually trying to achieve. So that was particularly good. But it was rooted years ago before in those early years. When they arrived, they came straight to our holding area, which was pretty close to the seascape property, just out of visual look. It was dark. So I was pretty buggered, I've got to say. I'd been pulled from pillar to post, and, I really felt sorry for our SOG commander. He had only been in the job a couple of, weeks and hadn't been a previous SOG operative. And so at that particular point when the Victorians arrived, we already had, we obviously had our cordon in place. We had them during the day. And so we had moved our cordon around the property closer under the cover of darkness. And we were still receiving gunfire at that stage. There were many reports and statements over 200 to 300 rounds of indiscriminate gunfire came from the seascape property, just in various directions. And sometimes that indiscriminate gunfire can be the catalyst for one of your members getting wounded without even, the gunman or the gunman seeing the person. So it was particularly dangerous for the guys. There wasn't much chance of relief for them because once you're in position, it's too dangerous to move in and out. Certainly during the hours of daylight, they'd been there since early afternoon or mid-afternoon.
So when we first got there, I was met by Jimmy and their senior ranking officer, and obviously they gave us a bit of a situational overview of what had happened. And basically the offender had moved from Port Arthur, taken a further hostage and moved to where it originally started the incident at Seascape Cottages, and had used a car and burnt a car there, and a police car had seen that on the way to Port Arthur, come under fire, and Taspol SOG had already rescued those guys. And then we pretty much had the classic siege. We had a stronghold. We knew where the stronghold was. We had an offender. We didn't know how many people were hostages, how many people were alive or deceased within the stronghold. And then we got a brief about what they'd deployed, their assets they had. But we came under fire whilst we were getting that brief. And we were within view of the stronghold, so we'd obviously told them to move back the command element, the command post. So they moved that back a couple of Ks, and we maintained our overview from that position pretty much on the road. So we laid out all of our equipment in the open on the road, and they moved back. They had it's like a command post van, large truck. They moved that back a kilometre or so, and then that was our forward operational base, and we operated out of there. The road sort of went, if you imagine a road going down at 12 o'clock, on the 3 o'clock or your right side was a mountainous forest, and then to the left, so on your 9 o'clock side, if you use the road as 12, it dropped away to Seascape Cottages, quite open. It had gardens around it. It was a Cape Cod type place with a few outbuildings that they'd just built that were similar. smaller versions, Cape Cod for a bed and breakfast, which is what that Seascape Cottages was, or the owners operated it as. And then there was water, and the bay came around. It's quite picturesque. So we operated out of there, off the road.
The SOG operators at that time didn't know the full scale of the offender's atrocities some 12 hours earlier, but they knew they were dealing with a mass murderer and they needed to stop the killing. It would later be confirmed that 35 people had been murdered and 23 injured that day at Port Arthur, the majority within the Broad Arrow Cafe. As team leaders, Craig and Mick joined Jim in planning out their tactics for the siege. Craig took on the role of assault commander.
So the first thing I did at that time was deploy our snipers, and we had several of them, and augment their sniper teams. And that was, twofold: to reinforce the inner perimeter and keep whoever's in Seascape Cottages in there, but also deploy our night vision capability.
It was now about 2 a.m. and Scott Grenfell was moved into the bush surrounding Seascape.
What that looked like from me was to deploy initially as a containment. So I was deployed to basically the front left of the property to contain him into that area. And I was told that there was a Tasmania member already there, an SOG member, and he was already in that position, and I was to go in and relieve him from that position. And even though it was a nice day in Victoria, it was dark down in Tassie, and it was near the water, and it was cold. And when I moved down into his position, I think I was probably 30, 40 metres away, and I could just about hear his teeth chattering, because obviously for the Tasmania members, they were deployed really quickly, and they grabbed what they could, and they were trying to find this offender. And I remember he just had his camouflage fatigues on, so the standard Australian military uniform, which is just a long sleeve shirt and cam pants, and that was all he had on, apart from his weapons system and armour and things like that, and he was really cold. When I got to his position, I mentioned the green and the black polar fleece I had on that I boiled in the aircraft on the way over. I ended up taking my green one off and giving that to him, and said, "I'm here to relieve you. You can move out and recuperate a bit." So I ended up being in that position for an extended time and just watched and listened to the offender firing the gun his guns every 5 seconds. Seascape's cottage was a double-storey building, and there was windows all around on every side of the house, and he had good vision out everywhere, and he appeared as though he had weapons set up on every window, and he was just running from window to window to window to window and just firing out the windows in every direction. And it was clear that he was intent on shooting more people, as many as he possibly could, including police or anyone that was around. It wouldn't have mattered, he would have, if he saw anyone, he would have tried to shoot them. But yeah, he definitely had an arsenal of weapons just set up on the window, and thousands of rounds that enabled him to just fire out all of those windows. But, like the coward he was and is, he would not expose himself. He would shoot from the darkness through the window. You'd see a muzzle flash, boom, boom, and then he'd run to somewhere else. And there was no pattern. He would just run anywhere and everywhere. Look, you're definitely elevated. There's an element of self-preservation. You don't want to indicate to him where you are or give him a chance to take a shot at you. Over the course of my time at the SOG, I'd been fired and shot at multiple occasions. But, you're trained. It's the training that you do, and it's what you do every day you go to work when you're at the SOG. If you're not involved in operational deployments, you're training and you're preparing yourself, and you find yourself in environments that are harsh and difficult, but you're trained to kind of deal with it. It's difficult to stay still for a long period of time in an uncomfortable position. So, you're moving and doing what works for you to stay alert and stay focused on what you're doing. And a good polar fleece jacket helps, yeah. There was open ground between our cover positions or concealment positions to the house from all directions, basically. So some to a lesser degree than others, but the challenge for us was if there is hostages that are alive into, still in the building in Seascape Cottage with him, and he's about or intent on killing those people, how do we get there across that open ground without being shot ourselves, given that he had these high caliber weapons set up in all of these windows and he had vision out all directions.
It was Craig's job as the assault commander to take the lead in formulating both an emergency action plan and a deliberate action plan.
An emergency action plan is pretty much if we get information that he's killing hostages or something dynamic requires us to go in and resolve the issue, arrest him or breach the stronghold. So that's pretty down and dirty type plan. In this case, it was basically drive up a number of vehicles and hit the stronghold from various directions.
With the long driveway through open ground to Seascape and tactical operators riding exposed on the side of the vehicles, it was estimated that up to a third of the assault force could become casualties in the case of the emergency action plan.
If we're driving up and we're not using any distractions, what's his ability to put rounds on target? And if they're travelling at, say, 80 kilometres an hour, and slamming their brakes, right next to the house, what's their chances of being hit? Still not clear enough that, we wouldn't lose someone. And then it's against why. Hostage, no problems. That's our job. We risk our own existence for somebody else's. We don't even know. So then there was, we've got a tank. No. Is there any armoured regiments in Tasmania? No. Is there any armoured museums in Tasmania? No. Okay, so, and you go through this chain of logic, and that's what my job was. Okay, can I have a Chubb armoured vehicle? They made that request. No, because I suppose they didn't want to get it shot up. Okay, can I have a grader with the biggest blade on it that you can find? And they found one, but it was on the other end of the spit of land, and that was in play.
But the preferred option is always a deliberate action plan, where police themselves initiate the end to the siege. Craig and the other SOG bosses from both states left no stone unturned in trying to make the deliberate action plan as successful as possible.
We trained, obviously, in how you make life and death decisions. You don't get into consequence-based decisions or, rush your decision-making if you don't have to. We want to get as much advantage as we can when we initially breach, and that's usually via distraction, there's speed, violence of action. There's a whole lot of factors that come into that, but that comes back into us. We're more proactive about that rather than reactive, where a emergency action plan is just a totally reactive plan or initiation of that. And then, there's various elements of what we decided to do with the deliberate action plan. And I was a bit of a student of history, and one of my roles in the training cell was always looking at overseas, and the Dutch had used an aircraft at sonic boom speed. So I had an F-111 on its way down that we were going to use to fly over at sonic speeds and basically blow out every window and cause a huge sonic boom above the house. So we had a whole lot of things. We had our own armoured vehicle in Victoria. So we had a C-130 coming down to pick that up and was going to take that from Essendon or Tullamarine or wherever they could land and then bring that over to us. So we had all these logistical things happening. It's all about distraction. So if you're running through a door and you know there's someone on the other side of it pointing a gun at that door, you want to make sure, you're going to rely on your personal skills, your speed, your fitness, your visual acuity, your reaction time, and then your ability to put rounds on target and ability to react. But you want to distract that person. So how do you do that? Well, there's obviously noise, violence of action, speed of action, all those type of things. And if you can make him duck, flinch, we had various distraction devices we would often lob into rooms, for those type of incidents to put them off. And you just, you're working in very small time and space, and then ultimately you're relying on your armour. If you do get hit, hopefully you get hit in an area that's protected, and if the worst comes to worst, you'll be able to put rounds when he's missing, if he does get some off. You've got to be quite confident in your training. We had a very experienced team. We'd been under fire before, and a lot of us had fired our weapons before in operations. So we're quite confident that if it got down to that, we had enough in our favour that we'd win with minimal losses or no losses is the objective. But, there's always the randomness of life, and that's just one of the risks of the job. It then became, yes, okay, we knew what his capability was, but quite confident we'd contain the area. And then it was a matter of, how we're going to resolve it. And are we going to push resolution, or are we quite happy to sit and wait? And if there's no hostages, there's no real imperative to go in, because you're risking the team members' lives for what outcome? It's just overtime bill, really, and money doesn't come into it. You're dealing with life and death, and, you're trying to safely arrest the offender without further loss of life, anyone's life.
While they couldn't be sure if there were any living hostages inside, they now were confident they were dealing with a single offender. Thanks to witnesses at the Port Arthur historic site, police now also had the offender's identity, and a photo of him was shared around the SOG operators. The photo showed a man aged in his late 20s with long, wavy blonde hair. As the night wore on, with sporadic gunfire still coming from the stronghold, Scott was rotated out of his containment role in the bush.
And then I was taken out of that position and ended up on the assault team, on the vehicles, or the arrest team, if you want to call it that. You go through levels of readiness when you're part of the arrest team, so they call it high level and low level. So when the threat's not escalated, you can be at a low level, but low level will mean you might have your armour off, as an example, to stretch your body and relax a little bit and, stay functional, but you're still ready. When the threat escalates, things might happen, you move to a high level, so that's your armour on, your weapon system's ready, you check all your equipment. And then the next level of that is being ready to go, if it happens. So that's standing on, you're on the side of the vehicle, ready to go. So throughout the night, that's what it was, a mixture of all of those three things.
Just before 6 a.m, Craig also changed roles.
I'd just come back from the national sniping instructor, so I knew that my skill set, it's a perishable skill, but I fired hundreds of rounds under stressful situations and training and demonstrating and stuff in the months prior. And I thought personally that because we weren't going to assault and there was no indication of hostages or any other party within the stronghold, that maybe the best resolution incident may be a sniper shot. And I thought that I might be the best one to apply that. And due to my skill set, all our snipers are great, but, you can't have too many out there behind the rifle if you need to, because, it could be small nuances in angle and foliage and location that negate a sniper taking a shot. I handed over the assault team leadership role to Mick and then deployed as Sierra 1 out into the field. I moved then with a junior Taspol guy. I think it was his first week on the team. And we moved out for extra coverage and moved another team around to another angle to get better coverage. So rounds would often come through the forest canopy. They weren't directional fire, they were just sort of random cover all over the place. And so I built a small rock wall and laid down using my camouflage, and the Taspol operator had a different weapon system to me. I had a rifle and the handgun, and he had an assault weapon, and his job was to protect me should someone come up on me from behind or something like that while I concentrate on the stronghold. So that was his role. So he was slightly back from me, and he wasn't a trained spotter. So I had to be on the rifle the whole time. In that position, I'd seen him come to the front door, but behind a fly screen door, a silhouette and fire through the door, a weapon. And but I couldn't take a shot because I couldn't tell if someone was in front of him, because all I had was a silhouette and then muzzle flashes.
As highly trained as all the SOG operators were, they couldn't help but think they could be added to the long list of victims. For Craig, his thoughts briefly turned back to his wife and newborn son.
There might have been a moment at the command post under fire or something. You think, oh, I think I did have that moment where I thought, I might not come back from this. And then you go, what? Don't think like that. Get back on task and you squeeze it out, because it's not. Then you start becoming about you and your survival rather than what you're there to do. And, you train yourself to do that.
As the sun began to rise for day 2 of the siege, Mick kept strengthening the Emergency Action Plan, known as an EA, and the Deliberate Action Plan, known as a DA.
Jim and I were starting to look at, could we get what was called a Rakel phone, getting a landline phone down to the premises as safe as possible to try and re-enter negotiations. The option of using PA systems that people might see on the TV is not necessarily a good one, because it gives away a position, and noise direction is as good as sight direction in starting to direct fire at some individuals. We had a rapidly changing situation as dawn approached. The stronghold was coming into greater view. We were able to get a little bit more detail about where we would drive up to make an assault on the stronghold. So we started to formulate what might be the drop-off points, the attack points, the ladder assault points on the stronghold, when Craig and other snipers started to call in the observation of smoke coming from the premises. And that was enough for us to stand to the EA. And by standing to the emergency action, the tactical teams, the assaulters onto their vehicles, weapon systems at the ready, method of entry systems at the ready, vehicles turned on and ready to go. And so the adrenaline goes up a little bit, the heart rate goes up a little bit, and you're starting to prime yourself what might be an intense period of activity. And as we stood to the EA, the snipers, and particularly Craig as Sierra 1, started calling in the increased level of smoke, the engulfing of flames in the top areas of the main seascape cottage.
And because it was the nature of the house and it was made of wood, it went up really, really quickly, really fast, within minutes. It had gone from like streaming smoke to the whole of the output story. Level 1 was consumed in flames and no one could live in that. So you could hear the vehicles fire up, and I was giving commentary when an individual who was on fire popped out into my view. That individual was on fire from head to foot, called it blonde hair. So there's a possibility, but could have been a female blonde hostage. So clothes burnt off, individual was screaming, and a high-pitched scream too. No weapon at all. No weapon was visible to me. But then he comes out on fire, identified him. He turned around and he saw that it was a male. He saw he had a penis because he's basically all his clothes burnt off, and called the assault. But instead of saying go, 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 which could be, with static or something interpreted as no, 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 we use a command initiated word that is unique. So we used that word, and they initiated the assault. So the vehicles drove down the freeway and turned left into the main road, an exposed road down to the stronghold. And I was in my breathing cycle, had my safety off, I had his head corded, could have taken the shot, and I did think about it, but we're not justified. If he had a weapon and he was firing, it's a different situation, but it wasn't that situation. And we get paid to act professionally, and supposed to be the most professional in the police force in that area. And our role was to arrest that individual. So I actually thought of the Dunblane massacre that had happened weeks before in Scotland, and the offender shot himself in that incident and killed a lot of children in a school. And the parents will be saying, we don't understand it. If you'd only been alive, we could understand it. So all that goes through your head while you're there, but ultimately not justified. Like I said, no problems resolving it another way if you'd been armed and a threat to the teams.
Scott, along with Mick and Jim, was part of the assault team tearing down the driveway on the side of four-wheel drives.
I remember those cars took off as quick as they could go down that winding driveway, and I remember thinking, this incident is bigger than Ben-Hur. This person has killed, it turns out he killed 35. Whether I knew that was how many at the time, I can't remember now, but we knew he'd killed a lot of people, and that he would have no qualms if he was still there shooting any of us. So I remember thinking on the side of that vehicle perched with my weapon pointing in the direction of the house that I'm not going to go down without fighting if bullets come my way. But I remember pulling up just at the front of the Seascape cottage there. I jumped off the side of the vehicle, initially with my weapon trained on the Inferno, thinking that's where the offender would be, but then quickly realised that it wasn't survivable in that Inferno, and turned to the person who was on the ground, and very quickly realised from the photo that I'd seen that that was the offender. But he was completely naked, so he'd torn off every item of clothing he had, and he was just sitting on the grass with his hands out by his side, no weapon. He'd obviously left all weapons inside the premises, no weapon anywhere near him, and whimpering sort of in front of me, and it's a memory I'll have for the rest of my life.
It was a moment where time sort of stood still. The Seascape cottage was absolutely engulfed in flames, and I recall the radiant heat coming off that. And I've not experienced a bushfire, but that radiant heat is something which will stick with me, forever. It was just intense. There were ammunition rounds cooking off or firing off inside the burning cottage. It was surreal. And that moment where there was these SOG operatives with their firearms trained on this individual who I will describe as being naked, unarmed, partially on fire, skin coming off them, pathetic. But it was that all of a sudden time stood still, and the cooking of the rounds in Seascape seemed to disappear. The heat you couldn't feel. And there was a moment in time in amongst those milliseconds where the professionalism, the ethos of those individuals shows why interoperability and training is so important, because no one did fire at this pathetic, naked, unarmed individual. There was no immediate threat. There needed to be no further loss of life, and the offender was arrested appropriately and professionally. I recall barking instructions regarding the clearance of the houses. Throughout the whole night, we still had 3 unaccounted for individuals, and they were the owners and occupiers of the Seascape cottages and the victim who'd been kidnapped in the BMW and driven back to Seascape cottages. So notwithstanding that we didn't have proof of life, and notwithstanding that we didn't have any information that they may have been alive, we still had to to make sure that we looked for them just in case.
Tragically, the bodies of all three would later be found in the burnt remains of Seascape Cottage. It's believed the offender killed each of them before the siege began.
So we then hand over to detectives to make sure, while the assault team element clears the other structures, of which there was a number of structures. So we did that, and I went down, and obviously the offender was on the ground, and he put up a bit of struggle, was, babbling on. But I remember, it's funny what you do remember, he looked up and he had a stupid look on his face and extremely blue eyes. And, the eyes are the window to your soul, and you see a lot about a person's, nature and what their intent is through their eyes. And, it's one of the things you learn in policing. And his eyes were like those blue marbles that ladies put as decorative items in bowls on tables, right? There was nothing. There was no life. It was just glass to nothing. Called in the fire brigade to put out what was left of the stronghold. We moved back to our forward operational base and started packing up. Did a bit of a debrief and then moved back to Hobart Airport at a leisurely pace, thank goodness. And we'd been awake then, 24 hours plus straight, 36 hours, whatever it was, and then caught our aircraft back to Victoria and then did our debrief back there. It was pretty limited because we wanted to get back out and out of the way. We'd done our role. There's no other offenders, and the focus, was and needed to continue to be with the wounded and then the investigation to establish, what went on and why. So we needed to just get out of the way and go back to Victoria and then obviously wrote statements and stuff there. That became part of the brief.
The offender would later plead guilty to 35 charges of murder and 20 charges of attempted murder. He was ordered to serve 35 life sentences plus 1,652 years in prison with no possibility of parole. In keeping with their renowned professionalism, the SOG operators treated the Port Arthur tragedy like any other critical incident. But the magnitude of the event, the deadliest mass killing in modern Australian history, meant it was impossible for each of them not to be changed by it. For Mick Hayes, the significance of Port Arthur only truly sunk in after they returned to Victoria.
The interesting thing about Port Arthur for the Special Operations Group members from Victoria that deployed was it was a siege. It was a barricaded gunman, potential hostages, unlikely to be alive, no proof of life. It was a barricaded gunman situation. And I and the other members of the team had dealt with many of those on many occasions. Not so much the hostages and not so much the gravity of the event, but when we broke it down, it was a siege situation that we needed to resolve. The magnification of the event afterwards is probably when it hit home. The amplification of media across the globe, the amount of attention, the amount of press, that's what makes it a seminal event for me.
Craig Harwood had to deal with some confronting questions from friends and family.
Everyone rings you then, and I had my own mother say, because she knew my role and knew that I'd gone over, and your family and all that are obviously concerned that you might not come back, but she asked me why I didn't shoot him. And you process that, you think about that a lot, but you're a professional, right? And you can't let emotion get involved there at all. It's unprofessional. It's not how you should, it's not how you're trained, and, your reputation is the only thing that you have. And, that could destroy the team. People often slide into revenge or their sense of justice. And we were trained to operate within, the law. We're not judge, jury and executioner. We're just the pointy end of the spear that, risks our own existence to put these people behind bars or before the court so they can be judged appropriately.
And for Scott Grenfell, Port Arthur still stands out among all the critical incidents he has attended.
A lot of people ask me in my career, Have you ever been involved in incidents that have affected you emotionally, and I suppose every incident you're involved in has an effect, but I tell people there's a couple of incidents, but one of the most significant ones was Port Arthur affected me at an emotional level. It wasn't until I got back to Victoria that I read and heard about, the victims. The worst thing I could have done is, which I did do, is pick up the paper and read the stories about what happened and who was murdered and how the events unfolded and getting engrossed in that sadness,
The SOG operators each needed to process the trauma of the tragedy, but for Scott, he had something tangible he needed to let go of.
When we pulled up with the brakes smoking, we were initially in a little shed sort of thing, and we were getting briefed about what was going on and who the offender was. And by that stage, they'd had a picture of the perpetrator, and they handed this picture around to all of us so we knew what he looked like. And I happened to be the last person who the picture was handed to, and I had a look at it. It's actually the picture you see a lot in the media, and I didn't have anyone else to hand it on to because I was the last person that received it. I ended up putting it in my pocket, and after the incident was all over and we got back to Victoria, I realised it was still in my pocket, and I felt wrong about having this picture of this person. I just didn't want to acknowledge him. So I ended up ripping the picture up and throwing it in the bin.
But for Jim and all his fellow Tasmanian police officers who dealt with Port Arthur, the trauma of the event was near impossible to escape.
In Tasmania, unfortunately, being a holiday island that everyone loves to come and have holidays and still does, but our innocence was taken away that day. What's frustrating, I guess, for all of us is that we're so highly trained. Craig and I being instructors, and yet there's not a thing that we could have done to prevent this. All the events that day had occurred before we got funneled into the seascape property. As a force like we were, combined together between Victorians and Tasmanians with a common purpose and being the ultimate consummate professionals, we didn't have the opportunity to stop anything from occurring. I guess at very least to have an impact, to save one life, to stop it happening. We weren't given that opportunity, and it's sometimes hard to face. So, from our perspective, it's exceptionally frustrating. I mean, I lived and breathed and stayed in the police force for another 5 years after that, became the SOG commander. It changed me. I mean, it changed my perspective when I became the SOG commander and thinking about that. We have a job to do. Just made us train harder to try and mitigate those risks more, but yeah, it changed. It changed the way that I certainly lived and breathed both off duty and on duty after that tragic day.
How so?
God.
You can need a moment.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
I carried a pistol 24/7. I mean, I was not going to let another that happen again, where I could have intervened or interjected and stopped something where we weren't allowed. That didn't happen for us on that day. So it made me think about what could have been but wasn't, and it was never going to be. But from that point on, until I resigned and went into the commercial world, my intent was never, both if I was going to the supermarket, shopping centre, anywhere, I was more alert than I ever had been to the events that those 4 people faced that day in the Broad Arrow Cafe.
Although that day 30 years ago was undeniably one of Australia's darkest, much good has come from it. It united politicians to bring about sweeping gun controls for automatic and semi-automatic weapons like those used in the tragedy. It was also the first of what would end up being many deployments where one state's police tactical team has answered the call of another. Just last year, Australia's largest ever tactical police operation took place in Victoria. Tasmania, along with each state and territory, and even New Zealand, sent tactical operators to take part in the search for a man believed to be responsible for the alleged shooting murder of 2 Victoria Police officers in the town of Paulpunka in the state's northeast. It turned out to be a full circle moment for Scott Grenfell. After working in the SOG, he has now spent 15 years as a tactical flight officer in the Victoria Police Air Wing. His SOG expertise has been pivotal for the Air Wing, which works regularly on operations with the SOG, including on August 26 last year, when reports came through of the shooting in Paulpunka.
I was part of the operational police crew on that day, and I was working with a more junior member, and we were going to do some winching training at the Yuyangs, which is quite close to Avalon, when the incident occurred, and we were called to attend that incident. I thought to myself, this is SOG territory. I immediately called our office and said, look, notify the SOG and see if they want us to get a team up there. And the response back was really quick. Yes, land at Avalon and collect an SOG team and take them up there. So, yeah, we landed, put a team on board and departed straight away and straight to Paulpunka. We got there probably in about an hour. We got overhead and we provide that aerial fire support to the members still on the ground. Then we conducted an insertion of the SOG, who then moved in and extracted the members with other personnel. And whilst we remained overhead, providing that aerial fire support. I've done a lot of training courses with the SOG in the helicopter where we've had interstate and overseas equivalents come and train with the SOG in our helicopter. And that's turned out to be really beneficial for when incidents like this have happened, and that interoperability with other states and agencies is required. So it's been really good. I think Port Arthur was the beginning of all of that.
But perhaps one of the most positive things to come out of the Port Arthur tragedy was the Alana and Madeline Foundation. Among all the deaths that day, the murder of the young Mikak sisters shocked Australia the most. 6-year-old Alana and 3-year-old Madeline were killed alongside their mother Nanette while trying to escape the Port Arthur historical site. A year later, their father, Walter Mikak, established the foundation as a charity to care for children who have experienced or witnessed violence.
The Alana Madeline Foundation is probably the epitome of what good can come of such a tragedy. Walter Mikak is just an amazing individual, and he could have gone back into society with hate in his heart and he could have withdrawn, but he chose to do something in memory of his children, in memory of his wife, and in memory of all of the victims, and try and put good back into the community.
You can look at a lot of the environments that Alana Madeline Foundation operates in, and those kids could take different paths, and the impact on society is profound. I think when we focus on those youth and those children that need it at a time that's they're forming, their own, views on the world and love and hate and their own character. And I think Alana Madeline Foundation, not only saves those kids, but maybe stops, ironically, type of individuals that, did the event.
Both Craig and Mick left Victoria Police many years ago and forged successful careers in the corporate world. But the work of the charity has been so inspiring that 5 years ago, on the 25th anniversary of Port Arthur, they both walked 410 kilometres across Tasmania over 10 days to raise more than $100,000 for the foundation. With the help of Jim in a support car, they also wanted to honour the efforts of the first responders at Port Arthur.
Just like we integrated with the Tasmania Police, there was a lot of moving parts to that incident that some didn't get a lot of recognition. You know, obviously, you know, we're in the spotlight because we wear black stuff and carry guns, and it's all pretty James Bondish. It has an appeal, right? But, you know, you had the general duties that were on traffic duties, and you know, first responded under fire from the offender, and then you had the ones that got to the actual site of the incident. You had the medical staff, the ambos, and then the hospital staff and the orderlies and everyone that was exposed to that horror. The fireys, you had the helicopter pilots, you know, you had security personnel, you had all these components of first responders. And you look at the size of that state, its capability, and what it was confronted with, and it did an amazing job. The Tasmanian people and the Tasmanian first responders should be rightly proud to this day of how everyone stepped up, everyone, and, you know, even members of the public and everyone that, you know, helped, because without that we probably would have had a lot of other casualties, and the incident would have been a lot worse than it was, and a lot of people owe their lives to those first responders, and it's not celebrated enough in today's day and age.
The people that responded in that environment, to me, are the ones that I sit back and stand in awe of. We played a small part. We were privileged to do what we did, and I'd like to think that we can now contribute back to the good that can come from it.
Police Life, The Experts is a Victoria Police production. Your host is Belinda Batty. A special thanks in this episode to Tasmania Police. This episode was written by Jessie Ray McCann. It was produced by Jessie Ray McCann and Nadine Lyford. The senior producer was Roz Jaguar. Audio production and original music by Matt Dwyer. News content courtesy of the 7 Network. Theme song by Vyacheslav Dragunov. Executive produced by Charlie Morton. This podcast was created by the Media, Communications and Engagement Department at Victoria Police. To learn more about the work of Victoria Police, go to police.vic.gov.au.